All right, guys, this is Chapter 1, Section 3 Notes. That should be your heading. Chapter 1, Section 3 Notes should be your heading. And beside your heading, I would like for you to write the word democracy. This entire section is about democracy and the different aspects of a democracy. It's going to sound extremely familiar because our government is a democracy, but this refers to any government that is a democracy, not just, we are not the only country that is a democracy. So here's some objectives for this section that these notes are going to cover. Here's also some key terms, so some words and definitions that we're going to see in this section. You do not have to write any of this down. You can refer back to it when you have the chapter questions that you're going to do. You can refer back to those key terms if needed. They're also in the section in your book, and they're also in the dictionary in the back of your book. So here is the introduction. What are some basic concepts of democracy? So that question should sound familiar because that was your focus question for today. So what are the basic concepts of democracy? So some of the things you could have written as your answer to your focus question would be the fundamental worth and dignity of every person, respect for the equality of all persons. You don't have to write this. This is what should have been your answer to your focus question. Faith in the majority rule and minority rights, the acceptance of compromise, and the insistence upon the widest possible degree of individual freedom that's possible. So we're going to touch on all of these basic concepts in these notes. All right, so you did not have to write any of that, but now we're going to start writing. So your first heading is going to be the worth of the individual. So that's the first heading. Worth of the individual. What does that mean? So democracy is based on the belief in the dignity and worth of every individual. So we're going to write that whole sentence. Democracy is based on a belief in the dignity and worth of every individual. Individuals can be forced to do things that serve the good of many, like paying taxes. So what you need to know is that individuals can be forced to do things that serve the good of many. An example is paying taxes. Paying taxes serves the good of everyone. So individuals, people are forced to pay taxes to serve the good of everyone. Respect for individuals means that serving the many should not be a case of simply benefiting the majority over the minority, but of trying to meet the needs of all individuals in the society. So that was a lot. What does that mean? It means that your government should not serve the majority. So when it's discussing the majority and the minority, it's not talking about race or religion. It's talking about the majority of the people that's in the democracy versus the minority of the people in the democracy. The majority are the most, the minority are the least. But what you do need to know from this sentence is that the respect for individuals is trying to meet the needs of all individuals in society. That's your important word, all individuals. So the goal of a democracy is to meet the needs of all individuals in society. So equality of all persons, okay? That's going to be your next heading that you're going to write. Equality of all persons. What does that mean? Equality means equal. Okay, so all citizens in a democracy are entitled to equality of opportunity and equality before the law. So when it comes to laws, every citizen should be entitled to equality and opportunity. What does that mean? Okay, forgot to erase. Oops. This means that no person should be held back based on gender, race, color, or religion. That is a democracy. And if you need to pause to get the notes before I move on, go ahead. I'm just trying to get them done as quickly as possible to not have a very long video. But you may pause and unpause as needed. So same heading, equality of all persons. So every person must be free to develop as fully as they wish. Achieving this goal of equality is an ongoing process. So we're not there yet. Democracies are not there yet. It's always an ongoing process to make sure that it's done, look at it as fully as they wish. Every person as fully as they wish. So that's an ongoing process. It gives an example of the Brown versus Board of Education. The Supreme Court ruled, what happened? So an example of the government stepping in, or democracy stepping in, is that Brown versus Board of Education is when the Supreme Court ruled that segregated schools were unequal. So when schools were separated based on race, the court systems said that that was unequal. So that's an example of every person being allowed to develop as fully as they wish. Next heading, majority rules and the minority rights. So next heading, majority rules, minority rights. So democracy holds that the majority will be right more often than it is wrong. That the majority will be right more often than a smaller group. That's the basic concept of democracy. The majority will be right more often than it is wrong, and that it will be right more often than a small group. But in your next bullet, it says the majority will not always make the best decisions. We can go back to the last example of segregation. For many years, the majority ruled that that was equal. So the majority can be wrong. And when that happens, democracy's concept is that that will change as time continues. Majority decisions that are not the best decisions will be changed. So they won't make the best decisions or even the right decisions. But in a democracy, their choices can be improved or changed over time, which is what happened with segregation, going back to the last example. The majority must respect the rights of the minorities and listen to their viewpoints. That's another basic concept of democracy. Your next heading, you don't have to write that whole thing, but your next heading is going to be about compromise. So your heading should just be compromise. Compromise is when one side gives a little and the other side gives a little and they come to an agreement. So compromise is a key part of the democratic process. In a society made of many equal individuals with different opinions and interests, public decisions require compromises. So in a society made of many equal individuals, because remember, everybody is equal. So when we have a society where everyone is equal, they're of course going to have different opinions. So for that reason, Decisions require compromises. Most public issues can be addressed in several ways in a democracy. And then the last one we are going to write, that determining which way is the best meets the needs of the public. It also requires compromise. The majority may not always be right. The majority and the minority will need to compromise in order to figure out what way best meets the needs of the public. All right, so same heading, necessity of compromise. So what is compromise? We talked about that a second ago. Everybody given a little. So compromise is a way of reaching a majority agreement. Okay, so compromise is a way of reaching majority agreement where everyone agrees with what that decision is. But what you do need to know is that not all compromises are good or necessary. You can look over here at the picture. It's a political cartoon that explains the chefs are compromising to come up with what would be best. So your next heading is individual freedom. Individual freedom. So these are the individual freedoms in a democracy. Democracy cannot allow complete individual freedom, which would lead to anarchy and lawlessness. If everyone could just do whatever they wanted to do, we would have anarchy and lawlessness. So even though there's a certain extent of individual freedom, everyone cannot just do what they want. Democracy does require that each individual be as free as possible without interfering with the freedom of others. So being as free as possible without interfering with the freedom of others is a basic concept of democracy. Democratic government works constantly to find the balance between individual freedom and government authority. Your next heading, citizenship. Citizenship is your next heading. Every democratic citizen has duties that they must obey. Each citizen also has responsibilities that they should fulfill. So, duties are a must. Responsibilities are you should, but it's not a requirement. The next slide is going to give us some examples of duties versus responsibilities. So let's look at some of these, duties versus responsibilities. So we're not going to write everything. We're going to write some. So you can make a little chart kind of like this with two different columns, duties and responsibilities of citizens. So what is a duty? Serving on a jury. If you're told, if you get a letter in the mail that you have to do jury duty, you have to obey that. You can actually go to jail if you refuse. You have to serve as a witness. You have to attend school. You have to pay taxes. You have to obey laws. You have to register for the draft. You have to respect the rights of others. So these are things that you have to do. So have to. These are just things you should do. As a citizen of a democracy, you should vote. You should volunteer. You should participate in civic life. Understanding the workings of our government. That's the point of this class. So these are things you should do. On this side, responsibilities. The duties are the things that citizens of a democracy have to do. The next one is about free enterprise. So your heading is just going to be free enterprise. Free enterprise is called capitalism. What is that? It is an economic system based on private ownership, individual initiative, profit, and competition. Check back for a part 2 video.